Hi, and welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's episode is all about accepting gifts from clients. What's ethical, what's not, what should you do, what shouldn't you do? It was just recently Christmas, so this is something that I saw pop up a lot in different places, and I know it's usually the time of year that that question tends to pop up more so because of Christmas. So I think, accepting gifts is something that sometimes isn't really covered in a lot of programs. Sometimes jobs don't really talk about it. So therapists are left kind of understanding, like, obviously huge gifts you can't accept, but not really knowing what the nuances are of that policy. So, or that idea. So I would say first and foremost, like, check with your licensing board. Sometimes different licenses, different state boards have different requirements. So I've seen some that have said things like you can't accept anything above $10 or you can't accept anything above like 25. I've also seen sometimes it not be mentioned at all, and it just doesn't leave you with a lot of room. So I would say first and foremost, just check and see if your licensing board says in any of the website, paperwork, whatever, if they say anything at all about whether or not you can accept gifts and what the limits are for that. The other thing is if you're working at a job, like an agency, a hospital, whatever else, a lot of times they'll have some sort of policy within the paperwork that you signed about that. So I would review that or talk to a supervisor, boss, somebody, and just ask, like, what's the policy on that? I just want to make sure that I'm really clear and I can reiterate that to clients if it comes up. So you want to make sure you're covered both in the licensing end and also whatever job you're at. Now, if you're in private practice or you're like a contractor in a position where you can kind of make a little bit more of your own rules, I would definitely, if neither of those things apply, right? Like say the place that you're at, the rules are a little bit different, or you're creating your own rules, or your licensing board doesn't really say anything about limits or gifts, then come up with something that makes sense to you and put that in your paperwork. So maybe it is a $10 limit. Maybe you're like, I don't want to accept anything, and you put that in. Maybe you work primarily with kids. So you say like any monetary gifts like crafts, artwork, things like that are accepted, but nothing with a monetary value. Some sort of policy in there. And I would even say if you're at a job that doesn't say anything and your licensing board doesn't say anything, that you should kind of have your own policy in mind anyway, because you don't want to be caught off guard if a client's like, here, I gave you this, or I brought you this for Christmas, and you are sort of like, ugh, now what do I say or do? You want to be prepared in the moment. You don't want an awkward situation where you just accept it because you're kind of caught off guard and you feel bad, and then you've got to later give it back and have a whole talk about it, or you tell them no and then there's like rejection. It's complicated. So go ahead right off the bat, whatever job you're at, wherever you're at in your career, figure out what your policy is going to be on that, especially if there's not specific guidance in other places. So I would say that's a big piece of it. The other thing is, obviously, again, you look at all the ethical guidelines, but think about who your client base is. Look at, like I said, age aspects, right? Like kids typically are going to be like, I colored this for you, or I made you this card, or here's this friendship bracelet. So understand kind of what you are and aren't comfortable accepting, displaying, stuff like that, because that could really have a big impact on the rapport and that relationship you've built with that client, depending on how you respond. So to me, when I worked with kids, I always accepted any of that type of stuff. You drew me a picture, you colored something for me, I would typically put it up too and just cover their name or cut their name out of the page or whatever it is. So if it was even like a bracelet or something, I'd put like a tack on the wall and display it. So I think, especially depending on the population you work with and stuff like that, kids, even teens to a certain extent, like they really want to be seen and appreciated. And I mean, adults do too. But I think with kids, it could be much more black and white for them. So if you're like, oh my God, I love it, thank you, I'm going to put it up. And, the next time they come in, they see it. That's really big. So I think gifts like that, art, whatever, I think that could be really helpful and really push that therapeutic relationship along if you're able to accept it and be excited and display it and all the things. So that's something to consider, the age group. The other piece is culturally. depending on the population you work with, the client you work with, there could be some really strong cultural implications when it comes to gifts. So for some, it's extremely offensive if you turn down a gift, especially if it was something on their end that's really important to them. It can create a rift in the therapeutic alliance if you turn it down. So, or if you turn it down in the wrong way. So, I think being able to really understand the cultures, the values of the people that you're working with, and if you know that it's potentially, I don't know, and again, an age group, a type of person, a type of way of life, their value system, whatever it is. I could think sometimes of like a lot of older clients that maybe don't have as much family. I'm thinking of people I've seen in like hospice, or people who are like in assisted living facilities, and social workers, therapists, whoever, who are working within those populations. They A lot of times people in those populations tend to want to give you more stuff. Oh, well, I'm not going to need this, I'm not going to use this, or I don't have anybody else to give this to. So you have to be very careful, because they're also a very vulnerable population. So I mean, like everybody that we see pretty much, but some it's a little different than others. And so you'll have to really understand the best ways to turn that down if it's something that needs to be turned down. But yeah, and like I said, culturally, for some people, it's extremely offensive if you don't take part in whatever that is. So I would say to be flexible, but have stern boundaries. And I know it seems kind of contradictory, but you want to have a stern boundary. Say the limit's like $10 for you. And you're meeting with a family, for example, you're doing family therapy, or you're working with the kid, and the mom wants to bring you something for a holiday, or they know it's your birthday or something that comes up. Obviously, if it's something that's huge monetary value, it's a gift card for $50, $100 to somewhere. You can't accept that, but you can accept the card it comes in. So being able to let them know, like, you appreciate whatever it is, but also you don't want to take advantage, or you don't want to get in trouble at your job. If you've got a job that's creating the policies, throw them under the bus in those situations. So at some point you might not have that, and you're the one that's creating them. But just explain to them like how thoughtful it is. Sometimes people will gift food. That happened a lot in different places that I've worked. And sometimes it wasn't cultural, it was just that person's hobby, and they loved it. And they were like, okay, I want to bring you this plate of whatever else. Or sometimes, most of the time actually, I had no idea. They just showed up with it. And they were like, here's these cookies that I baked. Or someone that loved a smoker in the past would be like, oh, here's these like ribs I made, and I don't even eat red meats. But I think with food, something like that, like, as long as it's not like something insane, it's 10 lobster tails or something crazy that is really expensive, I think it's okay to accept that stuff. Now, I probably wouldn't eat it unless it was for sure a client you like 100% trusted, and even then I'd be a little bit iffy, because they also may be like looking at your face to see if you liked it, and that could make the therapeutic alliance be weird. So if it's food, I say accept it. If it's candy, like little things that people tend to bring, go ahead and accept it. But remind them and use that as an opportunity to be like, hey, I really can't accept gifts. Like, I understand, like, you're just sharing something that you have. You didn't necessarily like buy it for me, but in the future, like, I can't really take anything else on, but I want to see pictures of what you made. I want to hear about it. I want the recipe then if you loved it. So there's ways to kind of like ease into turning it down. I think where people sometimes, therapists get very, especially in the beginning of your careers, you can get very black and white because you're so scared of messing up or of losing your license that your provisional license or the license you're trying to get. You're worried about like breaking rules, like any of that type of stuff. So things can be very black and white. And I've heard of some therapists being very much like, no, I can't accept anything. And it comes across as very cold and dismissive and kind of ungrateful, even though that might not be your intention. You're kind of like, oh, I'm scared. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to send the wrong idea. Like, let me just tell them, nope, can't take it. So if you come across that way, though, they might feel rejected. And depending on what they came in for or what they brought their kid in for, or whatever the dynamic is, that may really hurt their views on therapy. That may hurt their relationship with you. So it's really important to if you have to reject the gift in some way, maybe it's tickets to a concert, or I don't know, something that's just like a huge amount. I've even seen people posting in the Facebook groups things like, well, one of my clients got an end of the year bonus and they said I've been doing such a great job. They wanted to like pay for, like give me a tip essentially, or pay for like an extra session, but just give me like the money and not necessarily do the work because they're so appreciative of everything I've done. Is that something I can accept? No, 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 no. That one is very black and white. Anything, again, monetary is a no-go. Unless, again, you have like a $10 policy or something with your license and they give you like a $10 Starbucks gift card or something. But even then, I would be more likely to push, like personally, I would be more likely to push that back and be like, oh my God, I don't need this. Like you were so thoughtful, so sweet that you wanted to get me this, but like you just showing up and doing what you're supposed to do, that's the gift in itself. I wish all clients were like that all the time. So, kind of putting it back on them and praising them for the things that they are doing, and not making it seem like the gift is something that can shift the relationship at all, or something that they then feel maybe obligated, like next Christmas, to get you something too. It can be tricky depending, again, on the population you work with. Some people can use gifts to try to manipulate therapists. And it could be something that they play upon later, like, oh, well, I got you that thing. So what, now you're going to charge me for this session? Like, I paid that much on your tickets, or I gave you that bonus. Like, just use that for the cancellation fee today, or the no-show fee. Like, there's ways that people can then use it against you, and it really blurs the lines of the relationship. So I think that's why ultimately there needs to be some sort of policy in place when it comes to accepting gifts, because it doesn't only protect us, though it absolutely does. It protects the clients too from going down a path that's really like not healthy for them. And potentially, like, it can reinforce how grateful you are to them. That may be the perfect opportunity to be like, oh no, you don't need to show your gratitude with this gift. Like, I'm grateful for you and the work you're doing. Like, you can then use that as an opportunity for like positive reinforcement in a way that's not just accepting the gift. Now, like I said, there's those other gray areas of cultural and age and, the client's core wounds, and making sure you're not hitting on any of those things. So it is very nuanced. If you catch yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my God, I forgot to bring up the gift thing with a new client, I haven't mentioned it, or it's something that I really don't know if I can accept it or not. Maybe it is like an art thing that somebody did, but you're like, I know that this probably cost a lot of money for them to make, and they use a lot of materials and resources, or they could sell this for a lot of money, or something that's just like super meaningful to them, that you worry that by you accepting it, it may be something that they want or need in the future. I think if you need to buy yourself some time to think through it, to talk it out with a supervisor or a coworker or whatever else, then just let them know, like, hey, I really want to accept this. I think this is so kind, but I'm not totally sure if I can, and I don't want anything to ruin this relationship. So, or to jeopardize my standing with this job. So can I get back to you on whether or not I can accept it? If you need to buy yourself that time, then do that. I would rather you all do that than flat out reject it and, or just accept it. And then it turns out that you probably really shouldn't have done that. So I would just, use that as like a caveat in the moment. If you're like, ugh, okay, I want to, but hey, like, here's the deal. I don't totally know if I can. We have a lot of ethical guidelines as therapists. There's a lot of things that we can and can't do. So I just want to make sure that we're both following all the rules. So let me look into that, and then I'll let you know. But I really appreciate it. Like kind of taking on that tone, I think can be helpful if you're really just not sure. And maybe it's something you can't accept, but you don't really know how to tell them that, then buy yourself the time with that too. Just make sure that they go home with it. Whatever it is, the card, the gift card, whatever it ends up being. So I think that's really kind of it when it comes to accepting gifts. It's not as black and white as yes and a no, unless it's like a crazy money amount. And then it's an absolute don't you dare take that. But for the most part, there's all those little gray areas I mentioned that would be really important for you to consider, to look into, and factor all of that in as you're making a decision about what you can and can't accept. So I think, it's really sweet when clients want to do something for us. I think it's really kind and it makes us feel really appreciated. We just have to make sure we're not too in our feelings about it. And it consistently goes back to like, what's the best practice for the client? What's the most helpful, ethical, healthy thing that they can do or we can do in this situation to make sure their progress continues to move forward. And that's kind of where you have to really tune in more to the therapist part than the person part for yourself. But also making sure that you're connecting with them on a human level, because it's typically, unless like I said, it's a manipulation thing, it's typically like a really kind gesture for people to want to show appreciation or share some part of their life with you, a hobby or something else. I mean, I've had a client bring me flowers from her garden before, and they were beautiful and they smelled up my whole office in the best way possible, and I never had flowers that did that. But she cut them from her garden, and that was something that was like, okay, it's not really monetary. She has a plentiful garden. These were a few flowers that she had excess of, and it meant a lot to her to be able to put that in my office for other clients too. And she got to see them the next week. That was fine, right? She didn't buy them. She didn't go out of her way to send me a huge bouquet. Like, it wasn't anything to that extent. So that's what I mean. There's going to be those gray areas where you really have to think through like what makes the most sense and take your pride and feelings out of the equation and really think about like what's best for the client and what ethically is best for my practice. And also, would I do this for like every client? So, and that's where the food thing gets tricky, because I know that depending on, again, the population you work with and where you work, you probably shouldn't accept food. I think there's also sometimes clients that surprise us. I know I've had multiple situations where I've later found out something about a client that I was like, wow, totally did not expect that. And the few times that I can think of that are coming to my head right now are times where things were kind of dangerous. A client that was stalking someone, another one that was arrested for cruelty, another one that set fire to a building, like things over the, decade plus that I've been doing this, that I was like, wow. So that's why I would say with food, I would definitely proceed with caution across the board, because even if you think you know something, you again have to really protect yourself at the end of the day. So maybe you can accept it, but just not eat it. And again, you might know your clients way better for certain families, certain places, certain people. I don't know. That's your discretion, but I typically would advise against that just for your overall safety and consideration, because we know people, but we also see them an hour a week. So keep that in mind. But overall, if a client wants to give you a gift, for the most part, it's usually really kind. It's a sign you're doing a good job, and being able to even just take that piece of it and really reflect on that as a positive thing for you, because we typically don't have like customer satisfaction surveys. We don't have a lot of opportunities where clients can give us feedback unless we directly ask in sessions, or maybe you work at some kind of agency that sends out resources or surveys, but that's pretty rare unless you're in a hospital system. But I think it's really nice when we can get that acknowledgement from clients and lets us know like that we're appreciated. But ultimately, like I said, the consideration has to be for them. So look up your guidelines, have a clear understanding of what you can and can't do, both within your licensing board and within the job that you're at. And if you're creating your own policies, make your own in your intake paperwork about gift giving and accepting and all of that stuff, because you really want that to be as clear as possible from the get-go. It will protect you later on if something comes up and you can be like, oh, well, in this form you signed, or in my initial policies I mentioned that. And you want to be able to have that as a reference point in case anything odd or different comes up later. It'll protect you. But good luck with everything. Happy New Year if you're watching this at the start of 2025. And if you have any questions about anything, if you want to engage a little bit more, you could either comment or you can post in the Facebook group that I have for newer therapists. There's the link for that below. But definitely subscribe. Then you can stay on top of future episodes, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.